Patricia.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. Good afternoon, I'm Bree. I'm a current student and best friend of Patricia. In conjunction with her senior thesis work entitled Deconstructing Racism, Understanding Complexities, graduating senior Patricia Alvarado will deliver a lecture on the racism and microaggressions she has experienced from visiting artists, faculty, and peers. As a woman of color making decidedly political work at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. This lecture is meant to highlight the lack of attention paid to issues of race and privilege at MCAD, and will bring to the forefront conversations about these disparities so that they may continue to be acknowledged and challenged in the future. Patricia Alvarado.
Thank you all so much for coming. I didn't anticipate there would be so many of you, but I'm really happy that you're all here. Today's the last day of my undergraduate career here at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. Before I begin to speak about issues that I feel needs to be addressed, I want to thank everyone who has supported me in this journey. I want to thank my family, my professors, my friends and peers, and to MCAD in general for facilitating my college education. Although it's been a rough ending, I'm incredibly humbled and grateful for my experiences within this institution. I take everything that has happened to and around me as a learning experience. Every negative critique and every microaggression has been used as a chance for me to further dissect and understand the systemic power structures that be. With all that being said, I do feel like leaving MCAD without speaking to the issues I've had with the lack of dialogue surrounding race and privilege would be a disservice to my fellow peers and faculty. I firmly believe that these experiences and observations need to be opened up for further discussion for the sake of bettering MCAD for current and incoming students. I don't believe that MCAD is entirely to blame for the collective lack of knowledge and understanding about race and white privilege exhibited by plenty of individuals studying or teaching here. This is a much greater issue that stems from a system that is set up to oppress people of color and stifle the fact that racism is still alive and well as it has been. Being surrounded by artists and creatives doesn't prevent racism, sexism, ableism, or classism from existing in this space. I want to be very clear that this lecture is all about transparency. I would also like to be upfront in saying that I'm going to be referencing very specific events. I'm not going to be saying names, as this isn't about pointing out specific individuals, but an overall issue. If something I'm saying is about you, I ask that you refrain from raising your hand to explain yourself. One of the hardest parts of having these discussions is listening to people continually derail conversations to talk about their hurt feelings. Racism isn't so much about intent, but impact. It's difficult to have conversations with people who aren't interested in self-reflection or in unlearning internalized power structures. I ask that everyone listen, and if I happen to mention something that you said or witnessed, listen harder. Once again, I'm not interested in specific blame, but in a collective effort to be more aware. In the spring semester of 2013, I studied at the New York Studio Residency Program. There were 16 of us, artists, studying at the program, and we were all given our own studios under the same roof in Brooklyn, New York. At the beginning of the program, we were advised to put curtains up to close off our studios. This suggestion was made to prevent us from being distracted and to help us stay focused on our work. I never really saw what anyone was making until mid-semester critiques were taking place. One by one, we walked into each other's studios and critiqued the work we had been making. My friend and biggest inspiration, Amaryllis de Jesus Molesky's critique was last. And though I didn't know much about her at the time, she's now one of my best friends. As I walked into her studio, I saw that the walls were covered in these large-scale drawings and paintings of queer brown women, and I broke down. I've never in my life felt so represented and felt like I could look at something and see myself in it. After this experience, Amaryllis and I continued to have one-on-one conversations about what it was like to be a queer brown woman within academia and within the world in general. These are the first conversations I had ever had where I felt like I could truly embrace the intersections of my identity, as I had also just come out as queer a few months prior. When I returned to MCAD to finish my undergraduate degree in fall 2013, I was deeply alarmed by the lack of conversations taking place around issues of privilege, race, the intersections of systems of oppression, the use of white bodies as a default, and so on. At the time, there weren't many of us around, women of color that is, and it became increasingly difficult for me to feel mentally fed. I started creating work about being a queer brown woman, and all of a sudden, every single one of my critiques became about whether or not racism and privilege still even existed. I started speaking about racism incessantly, relating it to every possible topic, bringing it up in every possible conversation, but I truly just needed to find a safe space where dialogue between women of color about issues of identity could take place. During the fall 2013 semester, I took a class called Art and Community, taught by Professor Natasha Pestage. One of our assignments in this class was to create a project for a community we were already a part of, and I saw this as a perfect opportunity to create a safe space for women of color at MCAD to speak to one another about experiences and identity, about being a woman of color in academia, about anything we wanted to talk about. I teamed up with my classmate and dear friend, Quinn Wilson, and we started brainstorming locations, topics, dates, and logistics. The first time we talked about this group in class, I shared that I was scared of what would happen, that I knew how people would react. Quinn and I both had a lot of hesitations in making this group happen, and most of my suspicions were directly on point. The Facebook event we created to let people know the time and location of our dialogue was screen capped and posted on Tumblr and tagged as racist. And the same woman who did this, drew me and my fellow organizers, Leah Zobat and Maria Alvarado and I, as caricatures with exaggerated features yelling aggressively. People wanted to organize a whites-only club. I had people saying they wanted me to die, that I was segregating MCAD by wanting a space for women of color. I had younger women of color who wanted to be a part of the group telling me that they didn't feel safe at school anymore. All of this hurt on a lot of different levels. What we were trying to do was really positive, to create a space for marginalized individuals to speak safely and securely about lived experiences, and to be told that that was wrong was incredibly painful. People were specifically angry that we didn't reach out to white people, that we didn't make enough space for them in our conversation, that they felt unwelcome. Here's the thing, we literally never said a single thing about white people, and yet the entire conversation had been derailed to talk about them and their hurt feelings. Think about this for a minute. White people at the school were so uncomfortable and paranoid about us wanting to sit in a room to talk to each other that they wanted to make a whites-only club, as if the art world and the world in general isn't already living up to that standard. The level of ignorance was honestly astounding to me. For people to not understand that there is a monumental difference between marginalized people wanting a safe space to speak to one another and a whites-only club was scary. The entire purpose of this was to feel a sense of community, unity, solidarity, and understanding, and we were all made to feel unsafe. We pushed off the meeting for a few weeks to let tensions die down. You could feel ripples going throughout the school. When we finally met, it was honestly to this day the most beautiful experience I've ever had at this school. To sit in a room with 20 or so women of color was overwhelming, because when I walk into a room, the very first thing I do is scan for other brown people. And to enter a room filled with women of color who had to fight for the right to gather was a complete blessing. We talked for 3 hours. We shared stories and experiences. Some of us cried, some of us stayed silent. We all told one another why we were present in the room. I tell this specific story in so much detail because that was truly the event that set the tone for the rest of my MCAD career up until this day. I've heard over and over from multiple peers over the past year that because we're in art school and because we're surrounded by creatives, this should be a safe space in general, that it could be assumed that people here are more open-minded and accepting. And I really need every single one of you to understand that being a creative person doesn't automatically mean that you're not a racist. And it seems wild to even feel the need to say that. One of the first works I created after coming back from the New York studio residency program was about how I used to lighten my skin and thermally recondition my hair to be straight so that I could appear whiter. This work was a video diptych of me reenacting these Eurocentric beauty standards, and in my critique, I had a room full of white women telling me that they could relate because they hated wearing makeup. There's a complete disconnect there, and it's extremely problematic to be speaking directly about racism and the pervasiveness of white supremacy and to be reduced down to a white feminism 101 conversation about how makeup is annoying. It shows the striking lack of interest in intersectionality. I participated in the Walker Art Center class in residency in the spring of 2014. We had visiting artists come. A white woman visiting artist was brought in to do a presentation about her work. She had made a piece some 10 years ago about how she went to Asia and felt exotified there. When I brought up the fact that as a woman of color, specifically as an Asian woman, I found it insulting that she thought it was okay to make work about feeling exotic, when I would say 90% of my interactions with men are because they can't figure out what I am, as in where I come from. She said she had never been told that this work was offensive before. In the same class, a white male artist was brought in to speak about his work and how he wanted to speak to universal truths. When I brought up the fact that Black people are out here getting murdered as a product of institutionalized racism and fear with no justice and how that's a different universal truth, he told me he didn't want to talk about politics. It becomes convenient for privileged people to say that they aren't interested in talking about oppression, despite the fact that those experiencing that oppression have no real ability to hide from it. White bodies are constantly being shown as the neutral, a placeholder for conscious decision-making. The idea of universal truths being conveyed through nothing but white bodies is completely absurd, and in itself is an act of violence and erasure. Are we having conversations about representation in classes? Are we questioning the ideal? Are we truly being progressive? We had a white woman come in to lecture about feminism, and in her opening dialogue, she talked about how she wanted to speak to issues of women of color feminists and queer feminists, but in her entire presentation, the only non-white woman she mentioned was Angela Davis. It isn't enough to simply use intersectionality as a tool to get people interested in what you're talking about. There's already a long history of feminism ignoring the struggles of women of color, the hypersexualization of our bodies, the intersection of sexism and racism that must be simultaneously navigated by us, and to bring in a woman who literally only used our struggles to get people listening was completely irresponsible. In a liberal arts town hall meeting in spring 2014, I asked if the school was looking into hiring more people of color professors, as I'm fairly positive we have less than 5. I also wanted to know if more classes addressing issues of race and privilege, as the art and community class did, would be added to the next semester. After the meeting, a white male professor came up to me and told me that he was from Brooklyn, so he knew how I felt. Again, this kind of problematic gesture from a member of the faculty was troubling. He offered his time up in case I needed someone to talk to my work about, which, to be clear, was considerate. But again, there are a great number of white male professors teaching at this school, and being from a certain place isn't the same as having a conversation with someone who can actually relate to your lived experiences. Another white woman professor approached me immediately after and assured me that MCAD had attempted to hire more people of color professors in the past, but that they tended to leverage their position here into better paying jobs elsewhere. This is an issue with the education system in general, but to be told in a way that, well, we tried and it didn't work out was sad. Throughout the rest of my time at MCAD, I became very used to being continually let down when it came to talking about my work or talking about racism in general. I felt myself becoming a spectacle. I felt professors using me as a crutch, a source of information as a substitute for self-directed research. I've walked into 90% of my critiques asking myself how many more people could hate me at this school. I feel like I need to be 5 times smarter than anyone I'm speaking to about my work. I have to be ready to defend every lived experience. I have to be ready to explain over and over again that racism does still exist. When I, as a woman of color, truly realized the weight of sexism intersecting with racism and how directly that affected me, it was a traumatizing experience. It's difficult to sit in your own critique and listen to people ask you if you can just stop thinking about racism when you know it's literally impossible to just stop recognizing how systemic power structures oppress you. When my white male professor brings in a white male teaching assistant and then white male visiting artist after white male visiting artist, I start to feel like I have no one to talk to. When my white woman professor hands back my research paper about the exclusion of women of color from feminist discourse, and the first thing written on top is, you can't just generalize white feminists, I start to feel like there's no point in talking about any of this. The conversation becomes about how me calling out oppressive structures is hurtful, instead of being about how these oppressive structures are oppressing people of color. When I say that I felt myself becoming a spectacle, I mean that every time I speak up about racism, at least a few heads in the room go down. I mean that people literally want to watch me in critiques and find joy in seeing my facial expression turn from exhausted to enraged. The problem is that at this point, people want to know how I can be softer. People want to know why I'm aggressive or why I always look so distraught. Speaking up about systems of oppression is difficult, especially when you're in a room full of people who don't have your back. You can only be so patient. You can only hold people's hands for so long and gently guide them through Racism 101 for so long before you realize that there are people out here who truly do not care to learn. There are people who are truly lost to the cause, and I refuse to bend my practice for them. I straight up refuse to make my work more easily engaged with just to make it easier for those who benefit from white supremacy to engage with it. Let me be clear, not every white person is racist, but every white person benefits from institutionalized racism. When you derail the conversation to be about you specifically, you take away from a larger conversation. One of the central reasons I speak about racism with such frequency is that I feel a responsibility to do so. When I think about the fact that white privilege gives those who have it the opportunity to go throughout their lives without fully acknowledging how white supremacy oppresses people of color, I feel obligated to bring it up. I stopped caring whether or not people hated me for doing this. If I'm gonna be that one bitch constantly talking about racism in your class, that's okay with me. Having conversations about community and privilege in our school should be urgent and mandatory. The problem with speaking nonstop about systemic power structures is that people expect you to teach them. You can never just make your work and have it be justified by your lived experiences. I've had fellow students become upset with me for not providing them with in-depth explanations or for refusing to acknowledge certain questions. I'm not allowed to not have an answer or to feel too angry. There have been so many moments within the past year that I've been making decidedly political work where I've truly wanted to quit, or I've been so unhappy and wishing I made work about something simple and uncontroversial. But all my strength comes from my fellow woke individuals. Individuals at the school who have stood up when I've been too exhausted to say something was problematic. Individuals who use their place of privilege to educate others. Individuals who have pulled me aside to tell me that something I've said has changed the way they think. I don't say this to boast. Honestly, none of this is about recognizing my accomplishments. I say this to communicate to all of you that these conversations must continue in the future. I'm also not saying that I'm the only one talking about these disparities. There are far more people of color in this year's freshman class than I've ever seen at MCAD, which I find to be amazing. There's now a Black Artist Student Union founded by Precious Wallace, who took the time to talk to me about my experiences with creating a socially conscious. But honestly, the battle is far from over, and we cannot forget that even just a year ago, we wanted to create a safe space to talk to each other, and people wanted to form a mini KKK. Unlearning problematic prejudices is a never-ending journey of unpacking internalized racism, and I can only hope that as I graduate MCAD, these conversations continue to take place. We must all be woke. We must all be conscious of ourselves and of our privileges, and conscious to how those privileges alter our experiences with systems of oppression. Does anyone have questions or anything?
No, but I do want to make a comment.
Precious.
Hi, honey.
Founder of
Hi. Thank you so much for this figure and that was fucking awesome. Definitely deserve this conversation. So thank you. Thank you.
Well, question, sort of comment. My name is Shay. I am a local artist / incoming student again. I'm not a traditional student at McNally Smith School of Music in the Hip Hop Studies program, which is an amazing thing, but also I feel very, very, very terrified that I'm gonna have the exact same experience here. And I don't even know what to do about that. And it's partially because I will be in hip hop studies, and I doubt that there will be more than 5 Black people in the room. And so I feel really hard, and if you have any advice for a person who's gonna be that one bitch in the room the whole time.
Yeah.
For a year.
Definitely.
So I appreciate you saying all of this and bearing a similar experience that I'm probably going to be having and have had.
Yeah, honestly, it's been really difficult. When I say there are moments where I wanted to give up, there are truly moments where I was like, oh my God, fuck all of this. How do I even talk to these people who are truly not out here caring about any of us or caring about these issues that I care so much about. And honestly, the main thing that got me through was well, like thinking about how important it is to keep bringing this up, because like I said, there's a possibility, I think, that if these issues aren't brought up, there are people in the room who will never have to hear it in their lives, and that's terrible. Like, that's terrible, because we have to deal with that every day. And like, obviously different people of color have different experiences, but the erasure of that is still a huge act of violence. And so I feel like just talking about it as much as possible, and like, people will hate you. Like, people have hated me here, and you just have to find like that support system. Like, all my friends are here, and it's like, that really is like what got me through, So like, finding people, even if they don't go to your school, like people who are like-minded, who are woke, who like you can talk to about things that you care about, that will help you so much or at least that's what helped me, and that's what got me talking about any of this in the first place, was like sitting down with my friend Amaryllis and being like, oh my God, you're making these paintings of queer brown women. What? Like, let's talk about that. Like, let's talk about representation. Like, so yeah, really, I mean, it sucks because you have to be the one, right? Like, you have to be the one seeking it out, because it's not going to be brought to you.
Yeah, and my work is like highly political, and basically always about Black friends all the time, and basically always about like non-binary folks all the time,
Definitely.
all the time.
That's a beautiful thing. Keep
Literally
doing that. Yes.
So I already know, Like,
oh yeah,
you already know.
It's and it sucks that it has to be that way in like such a wide scale. But it's like, I feel like right now we're truly at like a crucial moment. Like with all protests, people are out here like truly trying to like get this like being talked about. And so I feel like as many voices that can contribute to that as possible, it can hopefully go up from here, So that's the advice I have.
Hey, well, my name is Leah. I just wanted to thank you so much for the speech. It was like so good. It started turning up. Oh my God, but
No one cry. I made it this far.
no.
I made it so far, you guys.
No, but I like you're interesting. Like, there needs to be like a discussion about it, and I feel like when I came here, I looked at the statistics after I came in. It was like the school is 98% white, and I was like, well, fuck this. And like I kind of thought like, oh, it's not that big of a deal, but progressively I realized it was becoming a big deal. And I feel like just as you were saying that Friend for You allowed you to have conversations because you saw their art being about queer brown women, like I just wanted to say that like I always looked up to you, and like seeing speech is like giving me the courage to like talk more about stuff like that. So I just want to let you know that you're right, that like some of us have like a responsibility, and it's giving some of us courage to talk more about it. And I just want to say like you gave me so much courage to talk more about it.
And it's terrible that it has to be like a responsibility, right? That like people will look at you in the room and be like, you're the one who's going to talk about this, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're the one who's going to bring this up, because there's professors who won't. Yeah, there's professors who won't. There's professors who, I've brought it up and they've been like, okay, so back to like what we were talking about. Like, it sucks that it has to land on people who have to like validate their experiences of just like living in the world. Like that's terrible. And feeling a responsibility to talk about these things is like, it's like good and bad, right? So like it's good because then you can like spread the word, and if you can like talk to one person and just have them be like, oh, like I kind of get it now, or like I can acknowledge that like these systems exist, like that's a win in my opinion. Like it's small, but like people talk to people, and so like that's a win. But it also sucks because then it's like like I was talking about feeling like a spectacle, like I feel like there is a definite expectation of people looking at you being like, what do you have to say about this? Oh, like someone did something kind of shady. What does Patricia have to say? Like it's always like, Patricia, like you're about to talk about racism, yes, like, and it becomes this kind of like, people are like excited about you, like people are just like, oh, like she's getting heated, like what's going on, like and it sucks, like because sometimes I don't want to be the one, like I want to just sit in the class and be like, this is whack, but I'm gonna keep it to myself because I'm too tired or something. But I do feel like I have, at least being in this school, and I probably will going on, feel that internal obligation to bring up these conversations, because like I said, like this needs to be talked about day in and day out, and I refuse to stop, and I refuse to like let people being like, your work is too aggressive, like I need an easier entrance point. Like I refuse, like I will not. Does anyone else have questions?
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Because the last time I did something public, we wanted the mini KKKs.